to really wrap your head around why people would be so hateful. It's not catty, it's cruel. Why you would do that.
It wasn't until word started getting out about her making people cry, all their staff resigning.
It's really interesting as I can reflect on it. I keep my distance from it right now just for my own well-being.
She had this opportunity to be a princess, right? But she sees more value today in being an influencer.
It's ironic that she doesn't want to be a princess, but she wants to be treated like a princess.
Yes, social media is a environment that I think has a lot of that.
It was supposed to be a moment of solidarity, a powerful woman defending another in the face of relentless public shaming. But the second Meghan Markle opened her mouth to stand up for Rachel Zegler, the internet exploded, and not in the way she expected.
If you hate Rachel Zegler, and you don't know why, or you don't have a good reason why, and for that matter, if you hate Meghan Markle, and you don't have a good reason why, I know why.
Within hours, clips of Meghan's latest podcast were circulating like wildfire, stitched into reaction videos torn apart in comment sections and dissected by media outlets hungry for outrage. She didn't just defend Rachel. She aligned herself with her. And in doing so, she may have reignited every criticism the world had been trying to forget about both of them. Because instead of shifting the narrative, Meghan's words triggered something deeper.
As a trained actress, what she does is that she studies people. She's not a good actress, but she is a trained one, right? She's been doing it her entire life. And there is no doubt that she studied, and this is the psychopathic elements of what she does, to have a conversation with her, bursting into tears. And she has convinced there's a thing called in psychology called the Freudian transfer. That is the truth. And it's worked, right? So she's done this convincing performance.
A firestorm of backlash, mockery, and brutal comparisons that left even her supporters speechless. The podcast hadn't even finished airing when the quote started trending. Rachel Zegler is misunderstood, powerful, and targeted by toxic fandom. That was the line that broke the internet. But the real question wasn't why Meghan said it. It was why she thought it would work. And what happened next would prove just how out of touch these two women had become.
Just become a parody. I just find her so hilarious. Like, if you sat down to write the character of a woman who'd thrown the royal family under the bus, accused them of racism, you've taken the title, but you don't want any of the responsibility, and you swan off to California and make rainbow fruit platters. I mean, she's just a joke.
Rachel Zegler wasn't always the internet's favorite punching bag. There was a time not that long ago when she was hailed as Hollywood's next big thing. The breakout star of West Side Story, handpicked by Steven Spielberg himself, a Disney princess. In the making, a Gen Z icon with a golden voice and a sharp mind. But somewhere between the dream and the debut, something shifted. The first crack showed during the Snow White press tour.
Cartoon was made 85 years ago, and therefore it's extremely dated when it comes to the ideas of women being in roles of power and what a woman is fit for in the world. And so when we came to reimagining the actual role of Snow White, it became about the fairest of them all, meaning who is the most just and who can become a fantastic leader. And the reality is, Snow White has to learn a lot of lessons about coming into her own power before she can come into power over a kingdom.
Instead of promoting the film, Zegler veered into lecture mode, calling the original animated classic weird, dismissing the prince as a stalker, and hinting that her version would fix all the so-called outdated values, what was meant to be empowering. Came off to many as smug and disrespectful. Disney fans felt alienated.
You told me before that your version of Snow White is different, and it's more of a 2022 version of Snow White. What did you mean by that?
I mean, the original cartoon came out in 1937, and very evidently so. There's a big focus on her love story with a guy who literally stalks her. Weird. So we didn't do that this time.
Traditional audiences were offended, and Rachel, rather than pulling back, doubled down. Then came the Evita drama. Whispers from backstage turned into viral rumors. Claims of diva behavior, screaming matches, and cast tensions. Some said she refused direction. Others claimed she acted like she was above the production entirely. Whether true or not, the damage was done. The internet thrives on perception, and Rachel's image had curdled into something toxic.
And because, I mean, you seem to be dominating the world of musicals. You're doing Evita in London, right?
Big Andrew Lloyd Webber fan right over there.
Is that your dad whistling?
Yeah. You guys see Stanley Tucci back there?
That'll be fun, huh?
It's going to be the best times. My West End debut. I'm so excited.
You've done a lot of Broadway.
Yeah, well, I did Shakespeare for 20 weeks. I'm coming off of that right now.
20 weeks of Shakespeare.
That's a lot.
Did they say, like, the audiences in England are different than the American audience?
I've heard they're more reserved, and I certainly didn't have a very reserved experience on Broadway.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we were in an 800-seat theater in the round, so you really are this close to your audience at times. And I'm with the biggest heartthrob in the world.
She was no longer the talented newcomer with a dream. She was the headline, the scandal, the warning. And as memes flooded social feeds and comment sections turned hostile, Rachel's silence only made things worse. By the time Meghan Markle stepped into, the picture Rachel's reputation wasn't just bruised, it was on life support.
Rachel Zegler's Snow White was met with a lot of backlash for racial reasons because Rachel Zegler's Colombian and Polish, where Snow White is German. Because after the new movie, they're changing why she's called Snow White, where it's no longer because her skin was white as snow, but instead because she was born during a snowstorm. Rachel Zegler personally got a lot more hate was when she said she didn't like the story for the original Snow White because it was a prince saving a princess and thought the prince in the original was a creep. She said for the new story, they changed things around where the male lead played by Andrew Burnap is no longer a prince, and she also threw him under the bus saying he might get cut from the entire movie. She also got criticism because she said her Snow White wouldn't be a maid to the 7 dwarfs, but in this situation, the dwarfs would do all the housework and not her. And she was met with a lot of criticism online, but she pushed back against that, saying she believes there's a bunch of men and people in general who can't tolerate the idea of a woman being the hero in a story. Many have pointed out to Zegler it wasn't the prince that saved Snow White, it was actually the Force itself. And she knows that if she watched the movie, but she hasn't seen it since she was 7. I think this is going to lose 100 million without a Charles Pearl subscriber. Learn something.
Meghan Markle has never been afraid to speak her mind. But this time she chose the wrong moment, the wrong message, and according to many, the wrong person to defend. In the latest episode of her podcast, Meghan took a hard stance against what she called manufactured hate and digital takedowns, using Rachel Zegler as her prime example. She didn't name names at first, but it didn't take long before she dropped the line that lit everything on fire. There's a young woman right now, talented, driven, unapologetic, being torn apart simply for refusing to play nice. She paused, then added, Rachel Zegler deserves better.
And when you've been through any level of pain or trauma, I believe part of our healing journey, certainly part of mine, is being able to be really open about it. And I haven't really scraped the surface on my experience, but I do think that I would never want someone else to feel that way. And I would never want someone else to be making those sort of plans, and I would never want someone else to not be believed. So if me voicing what I have overcome will save someone, or asks or encourage someone in their life to really genuinely check in on them and not assume that the appearance is good so everything's okay, then that's worth it. I'll take a hit for that.
And just like that, the two most polarizing women in pop culture were officially linked. Meghan framed her defense around feminism power and the dangers of online mobs. But the tone felt rehearsed, performative, almost like a carefully timed media move, not an organic show of support. What made it riskier? Meghan wasn't just defending a fellow actress, she was defending someone with the exact same accusations. She's faced herself, entitlement, arrogance, playing the victim while dismissing critics as haters. In trying to paint Rachel as a misunderstood force of nature, Meghan unintentionally reminded everyone of her own most controversial moments, and it didn't take long before people started connecting the dots. 2 women, 2 careers marked by rising fame and public backlash. But instead of lifting each other up, their alliance would only drag them both deeper. The internet didn't hesitate. Within minutes of the podcast clip going viral, the reactions poured in, and they weren't kind. X was flooded with posts calling the episode unbearable tone deaf, and most brutally 2 narcissists, 1 mic. That phrase stuck. It trended. It became the headline for every commentary video and meme thread, tearing into the duo. One viral post read, "When Meghan Markle defends you, just know public opinion is already in the gutter." Another user joked, "The unlikability crossover episode we didn't ask for." Even people who had stayed silent on Zegler's controversies suddenly had an opinion because Meghan brought her into the spotlight again. And instead of shifting the narrative, it fused two unpopular figures into a single target. Reaction channels went wild. TikTok creators stitched the podcast clip with eye rolls, dramatic gasps, and side-by-side comparisons of past controversies. Reddit threads resurfaced every old Zegler comment and Meghan quote that aged like milk. Even former supporters seemed exhausted. The most brutal part, it didn't feel like people were shocked, just validated, as if this was the final proof they needed to write both women off as out-of-touch elites, trapped in their own echo chambers. And just when it seemed like the storm might settle, something even more damaging reappeared online. If there's one thing the internet never forgets, it's hypocrisy. And Meghan Markle just gave critics a loaded gift. Within hours of her Rachel Zegler defense, an old clip from one of Meghan's earlier podcast episodes began making the rounds again, this time with a vengeance. In it, Meghan discussed the dangers of celebrity ego, warning about young stars who lose themselves in the illusion of fame and forget the value of humility. Her tone firm, self-righteous, almost like she was above it all. But now those exact words were being used against her because Rachel Zegler, in the eyes of the public, had become the textbook example of everything Meghan once criticized. The internet pounced, side-by-side edits surfaced, showing Meghan preaching humility, while Rachel arrogantly dismissed Snow White and mocked traditional storytelling. One creator simply captioned, "The mashup when the mask slips." But it didn't stop there. Critics began digging deeper, unearthing more contradictions, moments where Meghan claimed to stand for dignity, yet repeatedly aligned herself with chaos. It painted a picture of someone who either didn't believe her own message or was willing to twist it to fit the narrative of the moment. And for viewers who were already skeptical of her intentions, this was the final straw. Meghan hadn't just contradicted herself, she had confirmed their worst assumptions. And the fallout was only beginning. Just when the backlash seemed to peak, the story took a darker turn. Alleged leaks from a PR insider began circulating online emails, slide decks, and strategy notes that suggested Meghan's podcast moment wasn't spontaneous at all. According to these claims, the Zegler mention was part of a calculated media play, a rebranding effort. The documents reportedly shared with a high-profile agency outlined a new narrative strategy reclaim. The conversation linked with misunderstood female voices build a coalition around targeted women in media. The plan included specific names: Rachel Zegler, Amber Heard, even a rumored appearance from an unnamed pop star battling her own scandal, Meghan. It seemed wasn't just offending Rachel, she was repositioning herself as the spokeswoman for every woman who had been unfairly torn down by the press. But here's where it gets even stranger. One document allegedly mentioned a potential Dweseries in development where Meghan would host private interviews with women like Rachel about their so-called public mistreatment. The working title, Uncancelled. Whether the leaks were real or not, didn't even matter. The damage was instant. Viewers and commentators took the story and ran with it, spinning theories about how the podcast wasn't about justice or compassion. It was about power, about control, about manipulating the public conversation once again. And for Meghan and Rachel, it painted them not as victims, but as architects of their own downfall, if Meghan thought defending. Rachel Zegler would earn her points as a fearless advocate. The aftermath told a different story. Instead of reigniting sympathy, she reignited resentment. Viewers didn't see a thoughtful defense, they saw a tone-deaf alliance, a calculated move by two public figures who refused to accept any blame. For Meghan, the fallout was immediate. Media outlets that had stayed relatively quiet since her last controversy were suddenly back in full force. Headlines read like punches. Meghan backs another PR disaster. Royal rebel now, queen of celebrity chaos, and the one that spread the fastest. Meghan just burned her last bridge. Even neutral voices started pulling away. PR experts weighed in, calling it one of the worst-timed interventions in podcast history. One industry insider reportedly said, "She didn't just tie herself to Rachel Zegler, she stapled herself to a sinking ship." And the numbers told the story too. Podcast engagement dropped. Comment sections turned brutal. Even fans who once defended Meghan, in the heat of the royal scandals, were asking, why now? Why her? Why this? It was the worst kind of damage. Reputational, reputational, no apology, no retraction, just silence. And in today's media cycle, silence speaks volumes. Meghan hadn't helped Rachel. She'd simply reminded the world why both of them had become symbols of everything people were tired of. And with one clip, one name drop, one poorly calculated moment, she may have torched what little goodwill she had left. There's something deeply ironic about the way this all unfolded. Meghan Markle has built her public image around the idea of reclaiming control over her narrative, over her voice, over her reputation. For years, she's painted herself as a victim of institutional cruelty and media sensationalism. And for a while, that story worked. People believed it. They wanted to believe it. She was the woman who walked away from the royal family, who dared to speak out, who challenged one of the most powerful institutions on earth. But what happens when the very tactics you accuse others of using manipulation, spin emotional leverage, become the tools you reach for when the spotlight begins to dim? That's the question now hanging over Meghan's latest move. Because defending Rachel Zegler might have felt like an act of sisterhood on the surface, but to the public, it looked like a desperate attempt to stay relevant in a conversation that had already moved on without her. Rachel Zegler, in many ways, mirrors Meghan's early trajectory, bursting onto the scene with raw talent and immediate acclaim, only to unravel in real time under the weight of her own words. They were both embraced as symbols of progress, women of color breaking into white-dominated spaces representing the future of film royalty and celebrity. But somewhere along the way, that empowerment narrative turned sour. Not because the public suddenly hated successful women, but because both Meghan and Rachel gave them reasons to question the authenticity. Behind their message, the dismissive interviews, the tone-deaf commentary, the constant framing of criticism as hate. It's not that people weren't willing to listen. It's that they got tired of being told they were the problem for noticing when the mask slipped. And so when Meghan used her podcast to deliver what she thought would be a rousing defense of Rachel, it didn't land as a bold act of loyalty. It landed like an echo chamber. Two women who had failed to read the room speaking to each other through a platform designed to avoid pushback. It felt elitist, insulated, completely disconnected from the reality of how their reputations were being perceived outside their carefully curated circles. And that's the real danger here. Not just reputational damage, but a growing sense of self-delusion. Because if the goal was to spark a cultural conversation about mistreatment, it backfired spectacularly. Instead of igniting support, it reignited the very backlash both women were trying to escape. The fallout didn't just stop with them either. Their critics weren't limited to internet trolls or casual fans. Industry insiders began quietly distancing themselves. Hollywood's unofficial power brokers, agents, producers, studio execs started asking uncomfortable questions. Is Meghan Markle still a bankable personality? Is Rachel Zegler worth the risk? Because in a town that runs on money and perception, nothing is more dangerous than becoming a symbol of drama. And that's exactly what both of them are now circling. Not controversy drama, not activism, antagonism. And once that perception sticks, it's nearly impossible to shake off. Even more damning is the way this alliance has reset the narrative around Meghan's own comeback. For months, she's been quietly working to re-enter the media world with a cleaner slate, new partnerships, a rumored rebrand, whispers of a documentary project. But this single moment of public defense has cast all of that into doubt. It's like watching someone try to rebuild a house only to light a match and toss it inside while they're still standing on the porch. She didn't just delay her comeback, she may have undone it entirely. And the worst part, Rachel's glare doesn't have enough cultural capital to absorb the hit. Meghan took the bullet for someone whose own star is fading fast. There was no upside, no gain, just more smoke where there could have been silence. Because silence, ironically, would have said more. It would have given Meghan the space to observe, reassess, and return with something meaningful. Instead, she inserted herself into a collapsing narrative, hoping to spin it into solidarity, and ended up reinforcing the exact criticisms people have hurled at her for years. That she's out of touch, that she centers herself in every story, that she refuses to accept any form of public accountability. It didn't feel brave, it felt performative. And in a media climate where authenticity is currency, Performative is poison. And let's not forget the audience. The millions watching this unfold aren't just angry, they're tired. Tired of being lectured by celebrities who claim to be victims while sitting in million-dollar estates. Tired of moralizing from people who never seem to learn from their mistakes. Tired of being gaslit into thinking public backlash is always rooted in bigotry, instead of the simple reality that bad behavior, no matter who it comes from, has consequences. The public doesn't hate Meghan and Rachel because they're strong women. They hate them because they use strength as a shield from criticism and vulnerability as a branding tool. In the end, this wasn't just about a podcast. It wasn't just about one celebrity defending another. It was about what happens when public figures forget who they're talking to, when they mistake fame for infallibility, when they speak only to each other and not to the people who made them relevant in the first place. Meghan Markle thought she was doing Rachel Zegler a favor. She thought her platform, her voice, her story could protect someone else from the media machine. But what she failed to realize is that she's not outside the machine anymore. She's in it. And in trying to save someone else, she might have buried herself deeper. So what happens next? Maybe Meghan goes silent again. Maybe Rachel issues a vague Instagram story about learning and growing. Maybe the headlines die down for now. But the internet has a long memory, and both of their names are now linked in the public imagination, not as survivors, not as rebels, but as cautionary tales. Proof that even the most powerful platforms can't save you from the consequences of saying the wrong thing at the wrong time. And if there's one takeaway from this entire train wreck, it's this: in today's world, defending someone isn't always noble. Sometimes it's the thing that ends your own comeback before it ever begins. All.